Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our series on introductory syntax. Today, I'm going to be talking about both theta theory and what's known as either A movement or DP movement. So this is going to be going a little bit out of order from the way Carney presents things in the third edition. This is probably going to end up being a two-part video. So I'll stop the video and then restart things, mostly just to give you guys a break. But I do recommend that you watch these videos kind of close together. The reason that I'm going to present this way is that I do think that this subject really, these two subjects really do kind of meld together really nicely. So it's good to sort of talk about these things. So we've been doing a lot with our Xbar principles. So we've built up a sort of a framework with respect to the Xbar rules, and that's been great. We've established sort of a framework that helps us understand a lot of restrictions on Xbar and a lot of restriction on the sort of nature of sentences. But we might notice that there are certain areas where Xbar still is not getting the full story. In particular, Xbar, and we can again look at our Xbar rules. And let me just remind us of these. I have a chalkboard again, and I have a whiteboard, so we're living the dream. So we have our specifier rule, which says an XP goes to, I'm just going to do the English version of this one, but remember that we can have two versions of this. So an XP goes to a ZP followed by an Xbar. So that's that rule. That's our specifier rule. We have our adjunct rule, which in English comes in two forms. An Xbar goes to an Xbar, followed by a WP, or a WP, followed by an Xbar. So, like so. And then finally, our complement rule, which in English says that an Xbar goes to an X followed by an optional YP, like so. And these rules, work really nicely. They capture the sort of general optionality of all of these different categories across the different, across the whole domain of the English sentence. But when we look at an individual sentence, and an individual verb, for instance, we might start to say, well, these predictions start to fall apart a little bit. Because the Xbar rules are sadly insufficient to explain why a particular verb seems to require a complement while another verb seems to strongly disprefer or even disallow a complement, for instance. So, for instance, we can take a verb like resemble. And a verb like resemble seems to obligatorily require an object. So John resembles Mary. That is a verb that seems to require that object. So I can't say John resembles. John resembles what? Like, you cannot leave that object off, ever. Strongly a transitive sentence or transitive verb. Whereas another verb like perhaps sleep. Now you can find some examples of sleep being pseudo-transitive. Things like transitivity, especially in languages like English, is somewhat flexible. But sleep is fairly intransitive. So John slept the lamp is a garbage sentence. It's absolutely ungrammatical. But our Xbar complement rule right here does not make these predictions. It doesn't say that, oh, well, we can deal with that by saying, no, we can't. There's nothing there that says we can deal with that. So that's where we're going to need to introduce something else. We're going to need to introduce some other means of explaining these restrictions. And notice that these restrictions are syntactic. The syntax is ill-formed, along with the semantics, but the syntax is ill-formed. And this is fundamentally different than other types of like ill-formedness where things just don't seem to match up with like our semantic expectations. So I can utter the sentence, my toothbrush is pregnant. That's a weird sentence. It doesn't sound right. It sounds kind of gross. But it is still syntactically well formed. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the syntax in that sentence, even if the semantics don't seem to work. Whereas these sentences, like John resembles, Mary slept the lamp, those are syntactically ill-formed. So whatever's going on with our theta theory, with these theta rules, that has to be something that is happening in the syntax. So one of our questions is, well, what is that? How do we encode this in the syntax? And that's what we want to talk about today. So the core idea is that different types of verbs have different types of requirements. So a verb like sleep is going to take something like probably an experiencer or something like that, and it's going to assign only that experiencer theta rule. It's only going to say, okay, I can only have an experiencer with this. Now you can probably, sleep. If you add in certain prepositions, you can get different things, but we're only looking at the core verb sleep. So similarly, if we take a verb like resemble, I don't even want to think about what the different types of theta rules are. We don't really, I'm not going to get bogged down too much in the different thematic types of relations that exist here. This is something that we might care about, especially if we start caring about things like Utah, the universal theta assignment hypothesis. But for right now, we're just going to really care about the number of theta rules that a given verb can assign. So a verb has a number of theta rules it can assign, and an argument needs a theta rule to be allowed in the sentence. That's really going to be our core sort of assumption here. So the core idea here is that different verbs have different numbers of theta rules. So sleep has one theta rule. Resemble has two theta rules. A verb like put, where if we look at put says, well, you need someone who's doing the putting, you need an object that's being put, and you need the place where it's being put for it to be fully grammatical. So John put the book on the shelf. You can't say John put the book. You can't say John put on the shelf. You can't say put the book on the shelf. Well, you can as like a command, but you can't like in like a normal just sort of utterable context. So that has a requirement of 3 theta rules. So we can find that there are different sort of requirements of verbs and theta rules. So that's something that we can pay some attention to. How many theta roles does a verb assign? So then our next question is, well, how does the verb assign a theta role? We know that this is something that is syntactic. Well, if it's something that's syntactic, then we're going to have to pay attention to how we encode this within the syntax. And here is where we're going to start. Oh, what did I do with my... Oh boy. Try it. Oh, that works. If it's something that's syntactic, we're going to need to encode this sort of syntactic relationship in a tree structure. We need to know that these types of relations exist. And this is where things, I think, are going to start to kind of go, whoa, what's going on here? So I want us to look at a couple of different things. And again, we're going to split this video into two different parts because we're going to need to start really playing around with some different elements here. But the first thing I want us to think about is the types of relations that exist within theta roles. So one of the big questions that came up a lot in sort of syntax was the order of operations and the ways in which when sort of meaning enters into syntax. And I think a very natural way of thinking about this is, well, meaning must be the first thing that comes up. But I want us to go all the way back to our first video and remember that we're building a model of knowledge. And a model of knowledge is not the same thing as a model of processing or a model of production. And therefore, the meaning structure relation does not need to be the same. We don't need to have a meaning in mind before we start constructing our sort of model of knowledge, our structural knowledge. And I think that's really important. So there was actually, you can read the Linguistics Wars, where the generative syntacticians and the generative semanticists really went to deep battle over this issue is, does meaning happen before syntax? And some of this relates to this notion of theta structure, and then also what we're going to talk about very shortly, which is movement operations. But I want to look at one sort of movement operation that sort of plays around with a little bit with our theta structure. So we take a sentence like beavers build dams. We look at this sentence and we say, okay, yeah, seems true enough. Beavers seem to, that seems to be a general property of beavers. We look, general property of beavers that they build dams. Maybe not every beaver builds dams, but, most beavers probably build dams. We can also look at the sort of thematic relations, the theta roles in this sentence. Well, again, build is a verb that seems to require two arguments, two theta roles. So has a theme down here. Theme is generally the thing that's being acted upon. It has an agent. The agent is the thing that's doing the acting. Again, I'm not going to worry terribly about encoding all of these different types of theta roles, thematic relations. I'm really concerned about the number. It will be a little bit important to note when we have perhaps an agent versus a non-agent. But other than that, you know, the different types of objects that exist can be important, but it's not going to be critically important for us. So, but we can note this is the agent, this is the theme. And if we pacifize this, and I say dams are built by beavers, well, in terms of the thematic relations, the theta rules, they're identical. Dams is still the theme, beavers is still the agent, but semantically, they're not. This sentence is not true in the same way that the other sentence was. Dams are built by beavers is not a true statement in this world, where beavers build dams is. Because dams, if we look at a dam, there are many dams that are built by other factors, built by other things. Humans build dams, natural causes build dams. Maybe I'm not an expert on animal species, but there might be other species that build dams. So dams are not generally a thing built by beavers. So there's something kind of important about what syntax does, that it can manipulate our semantics. So meaning cannot be the input to syntax. And this is an important thing for us to keep in mind. We'll use this more and more, but the sort of notion of movement and theta roles play an important role in this very notion of meaning being something that happens after syntax is really important. Okay. So, as I pointed out, we have these theta rules. And we want to kind of utilize theta roles to sort of restrict our predictions on what is and is not a legitimate sentence in our grammatical theory. And we also need to be able to encode this within our syntactic tree. So what I would like to do now is think about how we can do this. And what we haven't seen yet is any sort of real relation between things within a tree. So this is going to be our first time that we see sort of the relationship existing between different elements within a tree. We're going to modify these relationships over the course of the next few videos, but this is going to be our first start. And I want to start off by looking just at the VP. And I'm going to utilize this specifier position for the first time within the VP. Because as a hypothesis, we want to say that relationships have to be local. That for something to have a sort of relation with something else, it needs to be a local relationship. And local meaning basically within a node of another node. So let's just use build. We were just playing around with build. So we'll build a tree from that. So build is a verb that has two theta roles. It has an agent theta role. It has a theme theta role. So we can look at its general VP structure like this. It's going to have a position for a complement and a position for a specifier, which is great. Because if we're thinking about this, this is exactly what we need in terms of something having two theta rules. We need a general sort of local relationship. Well, that could be within the same maximal projection. And we need a to have two positions. Done. So build DP dams beavers. So we're going to end up with something like this, where beavers is inside the specifier of the verb phrase, and dams is the complement of the verb build. And then build can assign its agent theta role locally and its theme theta role locally. Like so. Again, we will modify this. We're gonna have this is not our final answer to this problem. Notice that we're gonna have some issues with things that are have three theta roles, for instance, like give and put and so forth. But for right now, this structure is going to work for us for a little bit. So this is what's known as the VP internal subject hypothesis, where the subject begins the derivation inside the VP. And I had some questions on my last couple of videos about, well, how do we deal with VSO languages? And this is going to be one of the tools we're going to start to use to deal with that. We're going to need more tools, but this is one of the first tools we're going to use in our toolbox again to help us with our VSO languages. So the VP internal subject hypothesis is going to help us in part capture the necessary relationship between the verb and its arguments, and also it's going to help us deal with some typological problems. Now, I bet you're wondering, well, but that's not where the subject is. The subject is not pronounced inside the verb phrase. And you're absolutely right. So in our next video, which is a continuation of this video, we will tackle how to get the verb, or the subject, excuse me, from this position into an appropriate pronounced position. And for that, we're going to need to start talking about some other properties of the syntax, namely case and A movement, and also known as DP movement. So I'm going to also have that video up today. So the main thing to remember with theta theory is that a verb has a certain number of theta roles. Theta roles, especially in some languages, can be flexible with respect to a particular verb. So verbs like, let's say, eat. So you can get John ate the burger, or John ate. Now, if you say John ate, syntactically, there's really nothing there, but it does sort of have this sort of understood argument of John ate a meal. But those types of things are, there's a degree of flexibility So we could say that can be lexically encoded. But so the verb is encoded for how many theta roles it has. Each argument needs a theta role to be allowed within the sentence. It begins the syntactic derivation in a theta position, and we'll see that again in our next video. And then it's going to deal with other types of movement and other things to satisfy other requirements that it has. So that's where we'll move to next. I also know that these are sort of difficult and interesting times, so I wanted to close with something that's not related to the course or syntax. I've been finding some solace in some ancient philosophy. I've been reading some Epictetus, and I just wanted to read this for you all. So we're, if you're watching this years down the road, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, global crisis. My state is currently under a stay-at-home order. So we're only allowed to leave the home for essential business. And there's just a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. A lot of people are very sick right now. A lot of people are worried about sort of the economic future, and I think with good reason. There's just it's a scary time, and so I just wanted to read this short passage from Epictetus. I think I will continue to close my videos with short philosophy passages. If this is not helpful for you, feel free to shut them off before this. Again, this is Epictetus. Caretake this moment. Immerse yourself in its particulars. Respond to this person, this challenge, this deed. Quit the evasions. Stop giving yourself needless trouble. It is time to really live, to fully inhabit the situation you happen to be in now. You are not some disinterested bystander. Participate, exert yourself. Respect your partnership with Providence. Ask yourself often, how may I perform this particular deed such that it would be consistent with and acceptable to the divine will? Heed the answer and get to work. When your doors are shut and your room is dark, you are not alone. The will of nature is within you, and your natural genius is within. Listen to its importunings, follow its directives. As concerns the art of living, the material is your own life. No great thing is created suddenly. There must be time. Give your best and always be kind.